Right, I believe we are live. Perfect. Okay. It worked. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Vanessa Cheeks. I am with the Police Accountability Board. This is our virtual town hall talking about police accountability and the financial impacts of police misconduct. Today, we'll be discussing a recent report from the PAB on the cost of misconduct, and it sheds light on that cost associated and explores the implications in the Rochester community. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. If you are watching the video live, either on our Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter page, and you want to participate, all you have to do is leave a comment in the comment section underneath the video in any of those streaming services or any of those social pages. We will try to get to those questions and comments as we go through the presentation, but they will all be cataloged and considered as we move on to the next phase of this report before it's submitted to the Rochester Police Department. I want to thank Sarah. She's going to be doing the presentation. She'll be able to introduce herself coming up. She'll be giving an overview of the findings of the report and give a deeper insight into the policy recommendations that we'll be making and possible recommendations for you to consider. We do have interpreters available as well on the screen. But if you have any questions, please let us know again in the chat. And without further ado, I will give it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Vanessa. And hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Jenks. I'm an oversight manager with the Police Accountability Board. I'm very excited to share with you tonight our most recent proposal for change from the Division of Policy and Oversight. It's called the Cost of Misconduct. To get us started today, we'll talk about some background information, we'll go over some case studies, and outline the main objective for the analysis. We'll review the process for filing civil claims here in Rochester, what information we used for this analysis, and how we acquired it. Then we'll go into our results and discussion of the impact to taxpayers through a budget analysis. We'll see how our claims compare to other cities in upstate New York. We'll see how our claims compare within the departments in the city of Rochester. And finally, we'll look at the claims specific to the Rochester Police Department. Then we'll take a look at what RPD does with the information about claims of misconduct. And last, we'll review our policy recommendations for RPD. Over the past many years, there's been growing awareness and visibility of police misconduct. And a lot of folks have started to become interested in understanding the impacts of police misconduct. We're not the only institution to look into this. There are other municipalities, for example, the city of Chicago, who in 2019 released a report detailing $46.8 million in litigation costs for claims against the police. They've released a similar report annually every year since. In Austin, Texas, a nonprofit institution called We Measure found that from 2012 to 2018, on average, the taxpayers of Austin were paying $4.7 million annually on police misconduct payouts. And even national institutions like the Washington Post have conducted an assessment considering 25 major departments across the U.S. And that study found that $3.2 billion from 2010 to 2020 was spent on police misconduct payouts. It is important to note that Rochester declined to respond to the Washington Post's inquiry when asked to participate in that assessment. Our primary objective here is to understand, how does Rochester fit into all of this? What is the cost of misconduct to taxpayers of Rochester? And how do the policies that govern the civil claim process affect it? Many of us in this city are familiar with the tragic loss of Daniel Prude in March of 2020, who was died while he was being restrained by police during a mental health emergency. Many of us are also aware that this resulted in a $12 million historic settlement with the City of Rochester to the family of Daniel Prude. We also know that these financial costs, those tangible impacts of police misconduct, which we seek to quantify in this report, are merely the tip of the iceberg. For every act of police misconduct, there is trauma, there is injury. It impacts loved ones and community members. And those are things that we can't capture. Although we're unable to quantify them, their importance cannot be overstated. Here we have some statements from Rochesterians impacted by alleged police misconduct. I'll let you take a moment to pause, read the statements, and think about those who have been impacted by police misconduct that we know of and those that we don't. Okay, let's first take a look at the process for filing a civil claim here in Rochester. If somebody wants to seek restitution for damages they feel they've suffered due to police misconduct, they can file a claim with the city. The city may choose to settle the claim, which would result in a payout, or they can litigate, which would go to trial. Once it goes to trial, it may or may not come to a payout. And it's important to note that even after a trial begins, a claim can still be settled at any point in time. It can be settled before the trial, during the trial, or even after a verdict. All of these decisions on litigating, when to do it, how much to pay, it's all controlled by the city's law department and specifically Corporation Counsel. When we compare this centralized decision-making process to other cities, we see that we're actually kind of unique. We see that cities like Buffalo and Syracuse actually diffuse this power more effectively through their city charters. We see that their common councils or their comptrollers in both of the cities weigh in on that decision to settle a claim. We're going to go over the information that we used for this analysis and how we acquired it. I can't go through all of the timeline here today, but we do have this listed in the report, and I want to highlight a few key events at the beginning that we noticed became a pattern, which I'm sure you'll be able to read as you go through it yourself. On August 17th of 2023, the PAB submitted an initial source of information request to RPD. A few days later, on August 21st, Corporation Counsel denied our request. Knowing the information we requested was public information, the PAB submitted a FOIL request on September 7th for that same information. In anticipation of a denial of our FOIL request, we worked with community members through the Police Accountability Board Alliance to submit a similar FOIL a few days later. On October 18th of 2023, our FOIL request was denied by Corporation Counsel, and on that same day, the Police Accountability Board Alliance's FOIL was fulfilled by Corporation Counsel. But we want to emphasize that the acquisition of all of this information was largely facilitated through the intervention of community members. If not for that intervention, acquiring the information we needed from the city would have been exceptionally difficult. And still, even through that, we have outstanding data requests. Again, some disciplinary records, but also there are 78 claims that we know were paid out by the city, but there are missing payout amounts in our data set. We've requested those again and again, and we haven't heard back. And it's important to note that our request was only partially fulfilled. We asked for not only all of the civil claims data, but we also asked for discipline records that were associated with sustained misconduct for police in those civil cases. We only received the claims and we did not receive the disciplinary files. So finally, the data sets we did use were the Rochester civil claims data since 2012. And we found through public information, Buffalo's civil claims data since 2016. And the city of Syracuse fulfilled a FOIL request for us on civil claims data since 2017. We also used information from the Rochester annual budget and from IA Pro entries for civil claims, which is RPD's internal affairs database. Next, we'll look at the impact to taxpayers in Rochester. How do we pay for all of this? Well, many of us are familiar with the City of Rochester's annual budget. We know it funds things like the police department, the person in crisis team, the PAB, fire department, environmental services, the school district, libraries, and then lastly, risk management, which comes in undistributed funds. The purpose of it is to create insurance for the rest of these agencies. In the event that any of the other city agencies have a civil claim filed against them, the insurance would be responsible for paying out that amount. But we still have to pay into the fund for risk management. And the question is, how much are we spending there? Okay, before we get overwhelmed from all of these numbers, we're just going to quickly look at this and then we'll move on. So first, over on the left in the light gray, we're looking at all of the budgeted amount for that risk management since fiscal year 2011, 2012. And then on the right in the dark gray, we're looking at what we actually spent over those same years. Something that we might notice is that the city of Rochester changed in how they report or their transparency measures about paying out general insurance. It becomes more opaque after the year 2020. We see that in the red areas, which are highlighted. Before that, all of the allocation of funds were clearly specified, and we don't have that after 2020. With that in mind, we're actually just going to refer to those total amounts at the bottom. The total budgeted amount, which was $21 million, and then the total amount spent on paying out those civil claims, which was over $48 million. And then the difference we see we paid over $27 million more than we budgeted. All right, so we budgeted $21 million to pay out civil claims since the fiscal year 2011-2012. But then we actually spent $48.7 million. And specifically, we found in our analysis that for claims against RPD, we spent over $25 million. And what do we see there? Well, we can see that first of all, the city spent over 2 times the budgeted amount. Next, we see that RPD claims account for over half of that entire cost, and even more than it was originally budgeted over that period of time. 25 million is more than half of 48 million. And in fact, 25 million is more than that entire budgeted amount of 21 million. The impact of all this is simply that the allocation of tax dollars could have been spent anywhere else in the city. It was well over what we anticipated to spend, and that's the impact to taxpayers. Next, let's take a look at how the civil claims compare with our peer cities of Syracuse and Buffalo. We compared the number of claims per 100,000 residents and the average amount paid out per resident per year in each of those cities. We found that Rochester saw the lowest number of claims with 30 claims per year per 100,000 residents, while Buffalo had 32 and Syracuse had 40. But even though we had the lowest number of claims, we had the highest amount paid per capita. In Rochester, we paid on average $25 per resident per year, whereas Buffalo paid 18 and Syracuse $11. What does that mean? It could actually mean a few things. One, it could mean that our claims here in Rochester are inherently more severe, resulting in higher payouts. It could also mean that we experience procedural differences in handling claims, which could also lead to that discrepancy. Recall that we mentioned earlier that the decision to litigate or settle is made exclusively by Corporation Counsel here in Rochester, where Buffalo and Syracuse see a more balanced power. Now let's take a look at the distribution of claims within the city of Rochester, specifically between the different city departments. This graph shows the top 4 departments: the police department, environmental services, the fire department, new business development, and then the rest of the departments are categorized as other. We found that while RPD accounted for just 1/3 of the number of claims that were paid by the city, it accounted for over 1/2 of the entire cost. Let's compare that to the next most expensive department, environmental services. There, we see the inverse. Environmental services accounted for 1/2 of the claims paid by the city, significantly more than RPD, but those claims only account for 1/3 of the total cost. So what we're seeing here is a disproportionate cost to claim ratio. Even though RPD doesn't make up the majority of claims in this data set, they do make up the majority of the cost. Now we'll take a look more specifically at the claims against RPD. We want to know things like which of these claims happened the most frequently and which of them were statistically correlated with higher payout amounts. What we found was that the most frequent claims against the Rochester Police Department were first property damage, then violation of civil rights, then motor vehicle accidents, then bodily injury, and excessive force. The type of claim that was statistically correlated with a higher cost was discrimination, wrongful death, Section 1983, and bodily injury. There's a key overlap here between one of the most frequent claim types and a high cost claim type, which is bodily injury. We also took a look at what impact does the choice to litigate these claims have on the overall cost. What we know is that 24% of all of these paid claims were litigated. We found that the choice to litigate claims as opposed to paying them out ultimately was also statistically correlated with a higher payout amount. So the impact is this: the variables that are associated with higher costs like bodily injury and like the choice to litigate are occurring with regular to excessive frequency. They're occurring at least a quarter of the time, and they are associated with higher payout amounts. Let's remember that the primary objective of paying out a claim is to compensate civilians for the damages they've suffered from police misconduct. However, information about claims can also be a helpful tool for improving officer performance at RPD. So we wondered, what does RPD do with this information? Let's take a look at the RPD procedure for civil claims, which comes from the Professional Standards Section Manual, or the PSS Manual. First, the law department would receive all the civil claims filed against the city. When the RPD or its officers are named, the law department is supposed to send that information to RPD, who are in turn supposed to input the information into IA Pro, which is the Internal Affairs database. They're supposed to cross-reference with any existing PSS investigations and then forward the completed case package back to the law department if one exists. If that procedure were followed perfectly, we would expect to see every claim from the dataset we received from City Law exist in the dataset we received from RPD's IA Pro database. However, we don't see that alignment. There's a massive discrepancy, and in fact, only 300 of the total 900 cases overlap. You may recall that RPD has an early intervention system. It's called Benchmark Analytics. The early intervention system alerts the department when an officer may be at risk of committing misconduct. This early intervention system has the capability to include information about civil claims in its algorithm, but RPD does not use it in that way. Benchmark Analytics is very forthcoming about the limitations of their algorithm, especially the fact that its effectiveness depends on the quality of the data that's entered. In this case, we see the vast majority of civil claims that are being filed against officers are not being accounted for in the RPD's IA Pro database. And as a result, there's no way that those claims could be effectively used in the early intervention system. Last, we'll talk about our recommendations. It's important to mention that there are other legislative solutions that could impact these processes and outcomes as well. However, our focus for this proposal for change is on the policies internal to the RPD as opposed to a legislative action. The PAB recommends the following changes to RPD's policies and procedures. 1. Implement a quality assurance plan to ensure that all civil claims data in IA Pro match the data in the City Law Department's database. 2. Collect data on the outcomes of all the civil claims in IA Pro. 3. Commence a PSS investigation when a claim is paid out or converted to litigation within 18 months of the alleged incident. 4. Publish an annual review of patterns of civil claims against the RPD from their IA Pro database. And 5th, incorporate the outcomes of civil claims into the early intervention system. And that's all that we have prepared for you today. If you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback, you can reach out to us through the comments here. But you could also email us at pabfeedback@cityofrochester.gov. You could also go to our website, rockpab.org, and click on Policy and Oversight. Then you'll see proposals for change, and you can click Cost of Misconduct materials there. And then you can also call us on our voicemail, which is 585-280-3203. Again, if you have any questions, you can ask us now. Thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate you and the feedback that you'll provide. Hope to see you again.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a really great presentation. I don't see any questions or comments on the restream, but as Sarah mentioned, you can visit us online at rockpab.org. In our policy and oversight section, we not only have this report in full, but we also have, you have the ability to rewatch the presentation and also fill out a form online if you're more comfortable doing that. But all of your feedback is vital to this process, and it's a great opportunity for the community to provide, again, direct feedback and participate directly in this process and have a say in how Rochester police policies are formed. So that is all for us today. We are going to end the presentation, and we do have an event on September 26th where we'll be doing this again, but here at our 245 East Main Street office from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. You can come to our office for the presentation and speak directly to our policy folks and learn about this great report once again and offer your feedback there as well. So thank you, everyone, and good night.